Have you ever wondered how the long-standing Israel-Palestinian conflict came to be? Our story begins in the late 19th century, with the birth of a movement called Zionism in Europe. This was an ideology that aimed to establish a homeland for Jewish people. The place they set their sights on was Palestine, a region that at the time was under Ottoman rule. As waves of Jewish immigrants began to arrive in Palestine, they were met with a mix of hospitality and suspicion from the Arab locals. Yet, the influx of newcomers continued, driven by the promise of a homeland and the desire to escape persecution in Europe. Tensions began to rise. The cultural, religious, and political differences between the Jewish immigrants and the Arab locals were simply too great. The situation was further complicated by the fact that both groups had historical and religious ties to the land. The turning point came in 1917 with the Balfour Declaration, issued by Britain, which had assumed control over Palestine after the fall of the Ottoman Empire. It publicly supported the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. This declaration, however, did not take into account the aspirations of the Arab majority residing in the region, and so the stage was set for a conflict that would reverberate through the ages. Now, we've explored the roots of the Israel-Palestine conflict, and before we dive into the War of Independence, let's take a moment to reflect. This is a conflict that has spanned generations and has deeply impacted the lives of millions of people. But what if things could have been different? What do you think could have been done differently to avoid this conflict? Could diplomacy or a different approach have prevented the escalation? And how might the region look today if a different path had been taken? As we continue our journey through this complex history, keep these questions in mind. They remind us of the power of perspective and the importance of understanding history, not just as a series of events, but as a tapestry of decisions, actions, and consequences. Remember, your thoughts and opinions matter, so don't hesitate to share them in the comments section below. Together we can foster a deeper understanding of this intricate issue. Now let's delve into the War of Independence, a critical chapter in the Israel-Palestine conflict. The year 1948 marked a turning point in the Israel-Palestinian conflict. This was the year that saw the establishment of the State of Israel, a significant moment in history that had profound implications for the region. But this momentous occasion didn't come without its share of strife. It sparked what came to be known as the War of Independence. The State of Israel was born under the auspices of the United Nations Partition Plan, a plan that sought to divide the British Mandate of Palestine into separate Jewish and Arab states. However, the Arab nations vehemently rejected this plan and, upon Israel's declaration of independence, launched a military intervention. This was the beginning of a brutal war that lasted for nearly 10 months. One of the most significant outcomes of this war was the mass displacement of Palestinian Arabs, an event referred to as the Nakba, or catastrophe. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were displaced from their homes, either fleeing the violence or being forcibly evicted. This displacement further entrenched the bitterness and resentment between Israelis and Palestinians, and deepened the divide. Even after the war's end, the newly established Israel found itself in a region still rife with tension. Despite its victory, the fledgling nation had to grapple with the harsh realities of an ongoing conflict and the challenge of cohabiting with a disgruntled Palestinian population. The war ended, but the conflict was far from over. Fast forward to 1967, a year that would further reshape the political landscape of the Middle East. In June of that year, a conflict now known as the Six-Day War erupted. Israel, anticipating an attack from neighboring Arab countries, launched a preemptive strike against Egypt. This decisive move resulted in a swift victory for Israel, who gained control over the Sinai Peninsula, the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Golan Heights. This territorial expansion had significant implications. For one, it marked the start of Israel's occupation of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, areas densely populated by Palestinians. Israel's control over these territories meant that many Palestinians found themselves under the governance of a state they did not recognize or accept. This led to a considerable amount of tension and unrest. But it wasn't just about land or governance. At the heart of it all were the individuals whose lives were irrevocably changed. The war displaced thousands of Palestinians from their homes, fueling a growing sense of frustration and injustice. The aftermath of the Six-Day War also saw a rise in Palestinian nationalism. Many Palestinians felt an urgent need to assert their identity and their rights to the land. This period marked the beginning of significant armed resistance against Israeli occupation, with groups such as the Palestinian Liberation Organization taking a more active and militant role. The Six-Day War was a pivotal moment in the history of the Israel-Palestinian conflict. It changed the geopolitical map of the Middle East, and it intensified the struggle for self-determination among the Palestinian people. It's a struggle that over 50 years later continues to shape the lives of millions and the politics of the region. The war lasted only 6 days, but its consequences are still felt today.